yeah, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me well. In other case, just give me somehow a sign. I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk to you in that meeting here about my research on the Don, which is my case study. And just to give you a small background of that study, it started in some 20 years ago in a German-Russian joint mission that investigated the Greek apoikiai at Taganrog in the delta of the Don and also the surrounding areas. And I joined in 2006 as a student this project, and I also developed my PhD out of that, where I focused on cultural contacts between the Greek and indigenous people in the Delta region. And after that, I started kind of follow up smaller project because I was interested how trade relations between Greek and indigenous developed more inland into the forest steppe zone in. So today I will try to give a brief summary of these both approaches and my research on the Don, and I titled it as Change Through Trade, or How Greek Are the Greek Imports in the Pontic Steppe Zones. So the basic idea came up from two ground observations, two general observations. The one is, or the first is, that has, of course, not a unique case at the Don, along the entire river, as I will just pick up here a laser pointer. I marked here the Don on the map, and along the entire river course, Greek products, mainly pottery products, were found. And I wondered how these products were moving through the whole area. What does it have to do with the Greek apoikiai, or how is it related to that and developed to that? And also, by looking at this considerable distance between the region of production and this region of consumption, I wondered how these cross-cultural trade relations were organized. And the second observation at the beginning was more focused to the Delta region, where we could observe a massive increase of sites between the late 7th century BC, that means from the foundation of that Greek apoikiai at modern Taganrog onwards, until the early 3rd century BC, when the whole region was abundant again. And as you can grasp easily by these maps, we have from century to century a real heavily increase of sites. And I also wondered how this is, or if the Greek object that came to that region had any impact on this development. So this dynamic in movement of people, let me ask for some consequences of the consumption of Greek objects in cross-cultural areas. So just to summarize these both questions that stand at the beginning of my research is the one, or the first one, how were these cross-cultural trade relations along the Don actually organized? Who was involved in that exchange? And the second, what social and economic consequences did the exchange relationship have for social life for the Don communities? So what are the needs and interests of the agents, and how intensive was actually this exchange? And I will focus mainly on pottery product. There were also other imports from the Aegean world at the Don, for example, precious metal vessels. But I focused on pottery as they are kind of mass distributed and found in all of the sites where actually any import was found. So there are, of course, a lot of methodological pitfalls in these questions, but I want to stress two of them, or which I think are the main or major problems by investigating these long-distance trade relations and cross-cultural surrounding. The first lies in distribution map itself, and the second are the sticky cliches on the old concept of Hellenization. To the first, although there is a general awareness of itineraries and biographies of objects in recent scholarship, the investigation of long-distance trade is usually based on the pure mapping and counting of Greek objects in distant locations. But of course, these distribution maps alone do not tell anything about how these objects got to the place where they were found. So without combining these maps with further contextual information, they only offer a quite undercomplex and static picture. And this often leads to the second pitfall, what I just called notion of Hellenization, in which the trade in the steppes is often framed as a top-down import of prestige objects. This is a legacy of the glowingly veneration of Greek culture, which is deeply rooted, especially in Western classical archaeology. In this idea, the Greeks were thought to have kind of magical powers. Whenever the people of the colonized areas had the privilege of getting in touch with Greek culture, they developed an almost natural and inevitable desire to adapt and imitate it. And conversely, Greeks wouldn't take or use indigenous objects. This is put to the point in a very fantastic picture I put here bottom left by Vladimir Tolstikov, with a peaceful exchange between a Greek and a Scythian. So we see here two very muscular, two very serious men who are labeled with appropriate attributes directly as a Greek here and a Scythian. And also the dugout makes it clear the scene is in Scythia. And the plot, I think, is clear. The Greek offers the Scythian a freshly poured wine in a fancy kantaros. The Scythian gratefully accepts it, but does not offer anything in return, only friendship. So to avoid these pitfalls, I will combine the distribution map I just already showed you with some more contextual information of the settlements and burials along the entire Don. And I will also include information on social habits and practices in the sites in order to understand whether the trade with Greek objects along the Don comprised also the associated cultural concepts. So for example, that means, did people import also the practice of the symposion from the Greek world along with amphorae and drinking vessels, or did they consume the wine in completely other ways? So I collected the following 5 methodological steps to interpret the long-distance cross-cultural trade connections. This first step is, of course, the distribution maps and also the topographies of the area to ask where actually are the sites that imported objects from the Greek world. The second is about types and in which quantities these types came to the region. So what was actually traded and how regular. Then I will focus on the contexts of. Then I also try to highlight the economic basis along the Don of the people. So how actually is the system operated? And the last step is what I just mentioned. I will highlight some traces of practices with these imports, so how things were consumed. So I will now shortly present the results of my research to all of these 5 steps. And my aim here is an approach that integrates and links the steppe landscape, the local economies, and the social contexts in which Greek objects were found and were used. And I will argue for 2 aspects that you are already aware where I'm heading to. The first aspect is the potential to trade the Greek products further inland triggered a change in social and economic life from a nomadic to a semi-nomadic and sedentary way of life. And my second point or hypothesis is these Aegean pottery were fully incorporated in the social practices of the Don communities. Instead of the often one-dimensional interpretation of Mediterranean imports as prestige goods, I will argue here that they were transformed from foreign to local goods and thus became just one of the many things that people dealt with. So to show you how I come to these both hypotheses, I will now start by going through these 5 methodological steps. And I start here with the idea of distribution maps and the topography. So you already saw some time now, this map I created here. What does it show? I collected all sites I could get aware from in publications until 2015, where, actually all that fall into my chronological frame from the late 7th until the early 3rd century BC. And just firstly to see where they are spread. And it strikes the eye that the sites are mostly clustered in 4 micro regions. So this is one, what we already saw directly at the delta of the Don, and 3 other clusters in the forest steppe zone. You see here the border zone from grass to forest steppe zone. One is around Kharkiv at the Seversky Donets. Then we have another one at the middle reaches of the Don between these smaller tributaries, Tikhar-Sosna-Putudan region, and the further north cluster around modern Voronezh. And between all these 4 clusters, there is kind of nothing. So it is obvious a huge kind of emptiness also when there are several remote locations or sites. Just to have a short view on the topography, I'm sure you are all well aware. So we have this in the lower Don part, grass steppe zone, which is mostly really flat, without huge trees, mostly, grassy land, also suitable for grazing animals. And when we go in further north into the transition zone to the forest steppe zone, also the territory gets more hilly, especially here in the northernmost part. There are along the riverbanks already high hills of 50, 60 meter high mountains. So there it is clear connection between sites and the clusters of sites must have been gone through the rivers, which is maybe not so clear here in the grass steppe zone, also by looking onto this very huge loop that the Don goes to the east, which is actually a real detour, also looking at the distribution of sites, which is quite empty at that loop. So this is, first just to set the scene here. The second step already is checking types and quantities, and I put in here 2 pictures of the most representative types all over the entire Don region. So we have at the sites in the lower Don, as well as in the middle and upper reaches of the Don, mostly transport amphitheater from the Aegean and the Pontic colonies, along with some tableware of Greek production, mostly drinking vessels, like, for example, the kantharos. So important here is concerning the types that we in the entire region see always the same types in the different clusters. Concerning regularity, maybe you already noticed that I organized my map in 2 colors. So there is the green color for the phase 1 that covers the late 7th, 6th, and 5th century. We could, phase one, kind of archaic classical period. And you see this is very rarely in the clusters. Much more are the red points that represent the phase two from the 4th and early 3rd century BC. So there is visible a real increase of sites, not only what I already mentioned for the Delta region, but the same is true for all the other clusters. And how often or in which quantities came the Greek potteries there. This is what I try to illustrate in this map with the underlined numbers. So every number for a site which is underlined also bears Greek imports, and the others not. And so this, makes maybe for you, you can follow that in the lower Don region at the Delta, there's actually every site underlined. So a lot of imports came in. And when we go further to the north, here in these regions of the forest steppe zone at the middle reaches of the Don, there are also very many sites with imports, but only the further, the most northern territory has only very few of sites with imports. So that means we have along the entire Don the same Greek objects, massive increase of sites and also of imports during the phase two. That means mostly the 4th century BC, but the further north we go, the lesser gets the imports. So I will now spend a few minutes more in my step 3 with the contexts of use. And I start in phase 1 with the site at Taganrog. So the foundation of that Greek apoikiai at the last quarter of the 7th century, obviously immediately led to constructing or organizing in the urban fabric of that apoikiai by the Greeks. In the excavations we did in 2004 and 5, we directly found at the basic layers traces of a huge stone pavement that must have been part of a public space, because it covered kind of 150 square meters, so a very huge square, which was full with pottery fragments. And you can see also here at the assemblage of pottery that is a quite typical assemblage compared with other apoikiai at the Black Sea region, with a lot of transport amphorae, also a lot of tableware, and also, which is important in that moment, cooking ware, common ware, and these things of all day life. You can see just here, although this is today not very important, where the production centers of these amphora came from. So in phase 1, we have much more from the Ionian coastline, so today's west coast of Turkey, and in phase 2, which is already visible much less, there are more imports coming from the southern Black Sea coast. But all in all, this apoikiai at Taganrog in phase 1 is quite well comparable to other early Black Sea colonies. And also the exchange with the surrounding area developed quite promisingly for that site at Taganrog. Since the foundation in the last quarter of the 7th century, we can trace no other settlements, but directly other burials, so especially kurgans, that were installed in the delta and not far away in the lower in the region of the lower Don. And in most of these burial mounds at the lower Don, Greek transport amphorae were found as burial goods, as this example shows here from Novo-Alexandrovka in the delta region. Looking at the middle reaches and upper reaches of the Don, there we see kind of the same picture, although there are even already some smaller settlements in phase one, but mostly also we found burial mounds, and also there the burial mounds contain Greek transport amphorae. So that makes it, I think, already clear that these Greek imports were issued via Taganrog, or via this Greek apoikiai at Taganrog, which served as the hub. And what also becomes clear is that the Greek objects, which were found across the whole river basin, demonstrate regular contacts between the communities here, from also the upper reaches, also with the delta region, that they got actually these Greek imports. When we now move on to the context of the second phase, so more to the 4th and early 3rd century, we observe not only the significant increase of sites, which I already mentioned, but also that Greek objects are still used kind of in the same way, still mostly in burials, and also, as this case here shows, as burial objects. So the complete vessel, the complete amphora, was let down in burial together with the body of the deceased. I just took out here a smaller burial field from the delta area, which is for the smaller burial fields actually quite representative, with this huge part of transport amphorae, and the second group is made up from the hand-formed local pottery. Also now we can trace much more settlements, and even also in the delta region. And in these settlements, there is a quite different picture concerning the import of pottery, as you can also see here by this assemblage. I picked out also one settlement which seems to me very typical, where we also had excavated in 2008. So this is based on my own observations here, and yeah, you see quite the opposite from what I showed you in the slide before. Nearby 3/4 is made up by the hand-formed pottery, and the Greek transport amphorae are much less representative. The site itself is made up from, most of these sites are very small, unfortified, and with scattered dugouts, so not with an organized urban structure. Weakly defined occupation layers, often only a couple of centimeters thick, and this, by hand, my pottery dominated assemblage of pottery. I call these very small sites settlements of type 1, in contrast to the settlements of type 2, which are in literature mainly known as Garadisha. So they are significantly larger, and also to emphasize that, with fortifications. I think all of you are aware of this, for the delta region of the Don, most famous site of Yelisavetovka, because it was also the largest site at the Don at all, with around 55-hectare area. You can see here this aerial photography, and also this separate part where houses, dugouts, and above ground houses are organized in a more systematic way, with streets and an orthogonal street grid. And there are also much thicker occupation layers, and which makes Yelisavetovka outstanding from the other part of the delta, and also along the entire Don, is this really huge amount of transport amphorae. They in 2000 published a number of 200,000 fragments, and this is really unique in the delta, but also compared with other fortified settlements along the Don, which appear also in the middle and upper reaches. Just to also to get back to have a small look at Taganrog again, because it is very interesting that it developed in phase 2 in a completely different way, not as we would expect a Greek apoikia to develop. So the character changed significantly on both parts we could check, so the constructed features and also the assemblages of finds. We have in our excavation not found any more durable or more permanent architectural constructions after the 6th century BC. So what we mostly found of these phase mid-5th, 4th century are these very ephemeral constructions like normal pits, small fireplaces, or also these small settings of pebbles with animal bones, so maybe kind of a resting place. Also, there are much less findings. I already gave you a hint when we were looking at the transport amphorae from the archaic period 2 slides ago. But here you can follow this again, that there is a heavy decrease of the amount of pottery at all from the archaic to the classical period. And also the assemblage of animal bones shows conspicuous changes in the consumption of fish and domestic animals. The range of Greek shapes was less varied than it was in the archaic period. So for example, all these commonware and cookingware vessels are not anymore found in phase 2. Only transport amphorae, but mainly actually handmade pottery. So actually there is no more difference between this settlement at Taganrog in phase 2 and the settlements of type 1, the small ones I showed you with the example of Novozalatovka, which are dominated by the handmade pottery and a few Greek transport amphorae. So that seems that Taganrog is no longer typical for a Greek settlement of that period. And this suggests that at least the majority of the Greek colonists left the city sometime, obviously, between the late 6th and 5th century BC, and other inhabited came new or moved, joined the Greek apoikia at least. And these people obviously shared their cultural identity with the people of the neighboring sites, such as Novozalatovka, rather than with the Greeks. Based on that, Taganrog must be regarded as a failed attempt in Greek colonization. The Greeks obviously here didn't manage to establish themselves permanently. In combination with the appearance of Yelisavetovka and its masses of amphorae, it is clear that the hub switched over from phase 1 and Taganrog to Yelisavetovka in phase 2. The inhabitants from Yelisavetovka presumably were coming from the steppes, so replaced the Greeks in Taganrog as the main trading port on the lower Don. But obviously, this had no effect on the import of objects in the whole delta. These two settlement types, unfortified small ones and the huge fortified Garadisha, are located in a very interesting pattern, as you can see with these examples here. So the type 2 settlements have already this, always a small sign of the star, and they are surrounded by several of these smaller settlements. And this pattern, the different character of the two sites in general point to different functions of these settlements. And I think that the settlements, settlements of type 2, the fortified settlements were permanent regional centers, which served as small hubs, like local intermediaries, via which the imports got further to the small side. So I think the contact was between the delta and the upper clusters at the Don were mostly ruled via the fortified settlements, and they, in their small own region, served as the next hub so to say, second degree hub. So just to give you a short interim conclusion where we got so far by checking these first three methodological steps, we could observe that sites at the Don Basin are clustered in four microregions. Demand for Greek products arose directly after the establishment of the Greek apoikiai at the Delta region. This demand was focused mostly on transport amphorae, or let's say what was in the content of the amphorae, and the amphorae were mainly used in burials. We also see in the development between the phase 1 and 2, a significant increase of sites, and with this along an increase also of Greek imports. And we also could already notice a change of the trading hub, which moved over from the Greek settlement to the indigenous settlement from Yelizavetovka. So this connection, to understand how these regional clusters are connected with each other, I now wanted to check a bit more the economic basis of these sites, especially of the settlements. And so I went first through the published numbers of animal bones and the species, and tried to get some comparison here. And I think it is or strike the eye that we have mostly in all of these sites, a dominant of sheep, goat, cattle, and hoes, but no or very few pigs. So I compared the data of Novozelatovka from our own excavations, which was a small settlement in the Delta region, Yelizavetovka, and another one from the upper regions of the Don. The strong presence of cattle, which is visible in all of the sites I investigated here, speaks for a certain role of agriculture. Sedentariness is also reflected in the existence of the large fortified settlements with their huge number of finds and also the fixed architecture and the thick occupation layers. But concrete evidence for agriculture is rare. Archaeobotanical remains and objects like plowshares, grinding stones, and mortars that indicate grain procession were found only here and there. Hence, agriculture was obviously very weakly defined, and moreover in the open steppes threatened by drought. And with this in mind, I will interpret the bones of horses and sheep as part of the herds of semi-nomads. And also the low presence of pigs fits well into that picture. Semi-nomadism is characterized by an extensive pastoralism and a periodic changing of pastures during the course of the year. However, agriculture forms a secondary and supplementary capacity. In this context, the small settlements of the first type should be understood as seasonal basis, whereas the fortified, as I already said, are understood as permanent residences. And I want here to stress again the complete lack of settlements at the Lower Don in phase 1, the late 7th and 6th century BC, where only the burial mounds have been erected. That points to a fully nomadic lifestyle in this phase, and judged by the increasing number of large stock, the emergence of fortified settlements accompanied by extended burial fields in the course of 5th and 4th century, people transformed obviously their economic basis from nomadism to a more sedentary, semi-nomadic way of life. So this conclusion, combined with the wide areas between the microclusters, what I pointed out in step 1, the emptiness between the clusters, and also this detour, what I noted there, that the River Don makes to the east, points to the fact that the connection between the lower and the middle reaches and the transport of amphorae were operated not on the river, or not exclusively, by but by the semi-nomads during their seasonal changes of pastures. So this, of course, indicates already that we have more loose contacts between the Greek traders arriving at the Don and the traders semi-nomads who bring the stuff from the delta of the Don upwards to the clusters of the middle reaches. So it is not so surprising to see what I will now check for the last step. Oh, I'm sorry, just to give you a small summary here on that slide. The last step of to get back to the practices with these Greek objects and getting back to the question whether not only these objects were imported, but also the corresponding cultural concepts with that. So I foreground here some smaller observations. First, from the settlements, I again come back to the small site of type 1 Yelisavetovka, where I already mentioned this huge amount of handmade, locally produced pottery and only this small part of Greek imports. That, of course, already indicates that there was not really a need for Greek imports in these sites. But what we found, and I found that also in literature for a lot of the sites in the middle and upper reaches of the Don, is the fragments of amphorae were used in two different ways, kind of reused, for example, as storage vessels. This is, of course, not very special. We found that all over the Black Sea and Mediterranean. But what is conspicuous in that way is the reuse of fragments from amphorae as tools for grinding or abrading something. So, for example, to use it with the production of the local own pottery. But I think you can all see these heavy abraded traces at these examples. Much more Greek pottery, and especially the amphorae, were used in the context of burials. I already showed the use as burial objects when the amphorae were put as a complete vessel into the pit with the body of the deceased. And they are also found there mostly in a complete same combination with other objects. So especially with weapons that you can see all over here, but also with animal bones and knives. So this combination, they are also always found very close together in the pits, that it is not kind of consuming wine, like we know that from the symposium, but more to prepare the deceased, for example, was kind of a diet for the afterlife. So there is somehow another concept behind the combination of these objects in the burials. The other way where the amphorae are used in burials, and I think this is also very familiar to all of you, is the use as part of the burial rituals. So we can find amphoras smashed around a grave, so that, for example, like here, sherds of one vessel are found in a circle around one grave pit, or in the kurgans, they are stuck into the ring ditches together with animal bones. So they were part of all these feasting practices of at the funeral. And this treatment, although the treatment of the burial objects, has really no parallel in Aegean, so I actually couldn't find real parallels in the Aegean or Hellenic world. Amphorae are, of course, very familiar as coffins, so as sarcophagi for children or babies, but not as part of the inventory or of the rituals as we see here. Conversely, nowhere along the Don, these typical objects for Greek burial rites as lekutoi unguentaria or even strigile, something like that, is never found along the Don River. So there are obviously different concepts of burial rites between the Hellenic and these graves I saw here along the Don. What is also significant is that in the different microregions along the Don, there is a correspondence between all these habits and rites. And also in the quantities, they used the Greek objects in the burials, and the way they used them actually. So same position, combination with other objects, and the practice of feasting at the burials point to shared cultural habits throughout the whole Don basin. But obviously, they differ in their ideas and concepts from those we know from the Greek world. The association of amphorae and wine with symposion, I just touched already, and the symposion is, of course, the most important setting in which wine was consumed in the Greek world, is not evident in either the burials and also not in the settlements. On the contrary, people used the amphorae according to their own ideas and needs and incorporated them into their own semantic framework. The amphora were, so to speak, transformed from a Greek into a local thing. So just I will try to tie up all these loose ends I have picked up here in my presentation. I wanted to understand how these cross-cultural trade relations along the Don were organized and if they had social and economic consequences. And for that purpose, I checked these 5 steps. And what came out was that demand for Greek objects, predominantly for transport amphorae, developed directly after the Greeks established the apoikiai in the Delta. So there is a direct connection between the Greek world and the steppe zone started. And this triggered more and more people to move to the Delta. And after the first settlement appeared in the 5th century BC, by the 4th century, there was a huge cluster, not only in the Delta, but also in areas at the middle and upper reaches of the Don. So we have obviously a switch of economic basis from nomadic to semi-nomadic lifestyle, which was actually, or one huge point behind that, I think, is the motivation to trade the Greek products further inland. And that led also Yelisavetevka to take over this role as a hub and kick out the Greeks of Taganrog. So this is one of the very rare occasions where we can trace a failed attempt in Greek colonization. So actually the Delta formed a border zone in the long distance trade between the Greek Aegean and Black Sea worlds and the nomadic steppe zones of Eurasia, in which Greek objects were transformed into local objects. And in this sense, I think Greek objects were probably no longer perceived as Greek at all, but rather as one of the many classes of objects with the people dealt with. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention and your patience. And I'm, of course, interested in your thoughts and questions to that. Thank you.